The college football playoff is broken. What once started off as something for more teams to get a chance to compete for a national championship has turned into an overdramatic popularity contest that this year has, I think, finally boiled over into something that's needing a massive overhaul again. Ever since college football decided to ditch the BCS and the 1 versus 2 national championship and go to a college football playoff, they added a committee of people to pick the teams that were in it. It started with 4 and last season expanded to 12 teams. But the same problems are still there that have always been there, even ever since the BCS was the system that was in place. Teams are getting screwed over that shouldn't be getting screwed over, and there's clear biases from the committee. Today, we're going to be looking at a couple ways that could fix the college football playoff with a committee. We're going to see if a committee is the problem and see if computers might be able to do a better job, like the old BCS system, or perhaps even a new method that hasn't been tried out yet, and look at other ways that can fix the mess of teams getting screwed over. And we're also going to be looking at the teams that have been screwed over by the committee and show exactly where the bias lies. However, before we get into the video, if you would take a moment to please consider subscribing or dropping a like on the video, leaving your comments, or sharing the video, that would be much appreciated. But without further ado, let's get into our first topic here, which is how the committee actually picks who gets into the college football playoff. They do it based on who looks the best versus instead of mostly focusing on the records of the teams that are actually in the field. They do a lot of the eye test, or what seems to be turning into brand bias with a lot of SEC teams, Big Ten teams getting in and leaving out Big 12 and ACC teams. Just look at Florida State a couple years ago, undefeated conference champion gets left out of the playoff just because their starting quarterback gets injured. That has never happened before in the history of the college football playoffs. Not that it's been a long history, it still hasn't happened before, and it's almost unthinkable that it would happen at all, but it did. Why? Because their quarterback got injured? If it was Alabama, would that happen? If that was Georgia, would that happen? Is it because it's an ACC team and they looked kind of sluggish in their ACC championship game, but they still won it? Some people would still say that it's the right move to leave them out, but I'm sure there's still a lot of people who would say Florida State still deserved to be in it. Even though they lost their bowl game that season by a ton, we don't know if they necessarily were even playing super hard anymore because, well, they felt they should have been in the college football playoff. This to me was the first real instance of true bias and saying that winning games doesn't matter as long as the committee views you as a team that's not going to do anything in the playoff. It acts as more of an invitational, which is not what it was designed to be. Now we take a look at this season when the playoffs have now expanded to 12 teams as of last year. BYU was ranked number 11 before the conference championship game, and they were 11-1. The lowest ranking for an 11-1 power conference team ever. Why? Well, they lost to Texas Tech. They got blown out, but they still had 2 other ranked wins before that. And then, of course, they lost the conference championship again in another blowout to the same Texas Tech team, which is a top 5 team ranked in the country still. So it's not like it's bad. Yes, it was an ugly loss, but it was not necessarily a bad loss based on sheer numbers. And their strength of schedule is better than Miami and Notre Dame, who were 2 other teams that were on the bubble at the time. And it's not better than Alabama, but Alabama 9-3 after the SEC championship game. BYU 11-2 after their championship game because, again, they lost, but they lost to the same team twice. They still are getting left out of the college football playoffs, essentially for playing their conference championship game and losing, which is a very, very bad precedent to set that was already set in Florida State after they won the conference championship. It was a precedent of, hey, if you are not a high-level SEC or Big Ten team and your quarterback gets hurt or your star players get hurt, there's a good chance you won't get selected into the playoff, even though you're undefeated or you've won a majority of your games or you've won more games than a different SEC team has. For example, Oklahoma, who is 10-2, or anyone else that the committee has put in over BYU that has less wins than them because of what, brand bias, or because they might look better on the field, even though BYU's only loss is to the same team twice. They ended up what, ranked number 15 Utah, number 18 Arizona. They still had 2 ranked wins, but because they lost to Texas Tech twice, they're out when other teams with worse resumes get in. But this is not what the playoff was designed to be. It was designed to get the best teams in, regardless of bias, and that's not happening anymore. Now, theoretically, of course, one way to remove this bias is to go back to not necessarily exactly the BCS system, but a system similar that relies on algorithms and human, and maybe just other polls, just a bunch of algorithms making the decisions instead of humans on a committee. The first year we could take a look at where this would change things is the first year of the college football playoff, 2014, where TCU and Baylor were co-champions of the Big 12 because they didn't have a conference championship at this time. Baylor beat TCU head-to-head, but TCU was ranked higher heading into the last week by the committee. They were ranked 3rd, but in the final ranking that would decide who was in the playoffs, Ohio State leaped into the top 4 because they had a Big Ten championship win and the Big 12 had no conference title game. This essentially forced the Big 12 to put a conference championship game back just so they could at least have a chance to get a team into the college football playoff. Next up, if we take a look at 2017, where UCF finished undefeated and thought that they should have a chance at the college football playoff, the committee thought otherwise completely, mostly because of a weak strength of schedule. So the committee essentially said, unless you are in a Power 5 conference, there's only a certain ceiling really to where you can get to with the committee's rankings. And this kind of is what set the stage for the committee making a group of 5 guarantee in the new 12-team college football playoff that would come years later at the time of 2017. But at this time, it was essentially a guarantee that even if you went undefeated in a group of 5 conference, you would have essentially 0 chance to get into the playoff at all. Whereas again, with the BCS or other computer models, it might have still been pretty unlikely. There was at least a precedent and a chance that they still could have gotten in. And that brings us to this year of 2025, where in the college football playoff bracket, Alabama's number 9, Miami's number 10, Notre Dame and BYU are the first 2 out in that order, which this does 2 things. It sets a good precedent where the head-to-head games matter because Miami beat Notre Dame earlier in the season. It's a little bit weird that they've had them ranked behind Notre Dame the whole time that they've done these rankings the last couple weeks, but at least the right decision was made in the end. But the fact that Alabama is still number 9, even though they were ranked number 9 the last couple weeks as well, and they don't get punished for losing the SEC championship game, but BYU gets left out even though they were ahead of Miami, behind Notre Dame, but ahead of Miami, but they get left out and essentially punished for losing a conference championship game, despite the fact that BYU has 11 wins. They finished 11-1. They lost the conference championship game to the same team that they lost to. They were ranked number 11 before that, so they were pretty much out of the playoffs. Anyway, it just doesn't really make any sense how a Power 5 team with 11 wins gets knocked out of the playoff when that's never happened before. It's changing the fabric of how teams are selected into the college football playoff. It already was switched. We saw that with the Florida State year, where it's not results based. It's just based on how good they think you're going to play or how much talent is on your team. And you look at a team like Ole Miss, who is losing Lane Kiffin. You look at Oklahoma. You look at Texas A&M, which they deserve to be in there for sure. All of these teams I'm mentioning deserve to be in there also. BYU has more wins than all of them. A&M, they have the same, but they have more wins than all of them, and their only 2 losses are to the same team. They have a higher SOR, which is strength of record. It's an ESPN metric. It basically just describes a team's performance relative to the difficulty of their schedule. It measures how impressive a team's record is based on the schedule. Essentially, it's saying how well a top 25 team, or how high of a chance they would have to achieve the same record or better with the same schedule. The lower the number, the better, because that means you had a stronger performance against tougher competition, and of course, vice versa the other way. And if you let me set the stage a little bit here, really the only teams that are on the bubble are BYU, Miami, and Notre Dame. All the other teams either seem to be pretty much guaranteed in or guaranteed out, including Alabama. Alabama could also slip out of the bracket. Again, we'll find out for sure on Sunday, but this applies to them in this case as well because BYU is 6th in SOR. Bama is 8, Miami's 14, and Notre Dame is 13. So already BYU's resume is better than both of those teams when it comes to SOR. Their strength of schedule is better than Notre Dame and Miami's also, not Alabama's. But again, Alabama's more likely to get in than BYU because even though, yes, they have more losses and less wins, brand bias is a thing and they're already rated higher than BYU was. So this is more so about BYU because they should not be out of the playoffs. If you look at the rest of these metrics here, like the FPI and the game control metrics, BYU ranks lower than Notre Dame and Miami. However, again, BYU has more wins than both of those teams. And why do we play the games if having more wins does not matter? Whatever way you want to look at it, there's just been so much drama and so much talk about the college football playoffs this year that I think really no matter what it is, there's going to be so many people upset about it. And I think it's just going to cause even more changes to happen and probably not good ones. But that's why I have also come with solutions next to my complaints. The first one, and one that I've kind of been preaching about for years at this point, is instead of at least when it first pitched expansion from the 4 teams, is to go to a 6-team playoff format. Essentially the way that it would work is you could keep the 4 highest rated conference champions, make it in no matter what, and then the at-large spots are just the best non-champion teams. You don't necessarily have to guarantee a group of 5 spot, because if they're the highest rated conference champion, then they would get in, like for example this year. But it's one of those things where even though some years might not have a group of 5 team, there's some years like this year that definitely would, and last year with Boise State in it as well. So you'd still have chances for group of 5 teams to get in, and they'd probably really deserve it if they got in. How the bracket would work is obviously the 1 and 2 seeds would get a bye, and the 3 seed would play the 6 seed, and the 4 would play the 5. And then I would say it probably reseeds to where the lowest seeded team plays the number 1, and then 2 plays the second lowest rated seed, just so that way it's a little bit more balanced and fair. This way, yes, the regular season might matter for less teams than it does now, but the games would still matter a bunch. It would also get rid of any arguments for 9-3 SEC and Big Ten teams, maybe even 10-2 teams. It would basically be conference champions and then 2 outliers that are still really good teams that have a good chance to get in. Because, I mean, if we're being completely honest here, even last year with the 12-team playoff and when the playoff was 4 teams, there's really only about 6 teams that feel like they have a chance to win the national championship. So why not just have it be 6 teams in it anyway? You can even get rid of like the qualifiers, and it would just be the 6 teams that are most likely going to fight for a championship. But then, of course, that brings in bias. So you probably still have to have the automatic qualifiers to ensure, or at least help, that bias doesn't get in the way of actually putting the best teams in there. Now, I know realistically at this point, it's probably never going to happen just because the NCAA loves their money and schools love their money, and they'd probably lose on money by having less playoff games and less teams in the playoff. So it would be very unrealistic to go backwards at this point. But I still think this is probably the best solution. Another solution that I've seen floated around more recently is switching to the FCS playoff structure, where it's 24 teams. The automatic qualifiers is every single conference champion, including Group of 5. The rest of the spots are basically just what the top 24 is, top 25, whatever. Top 8 teams would get first round buys. I think if you did this, you'd have to get rid of bowl games, but since the college playoff seems like it's going to keep expanding anyway, this could be a lot more of a realistic way to go. However, there's still issues with it. One reason would be player safety, because it would add maybe up to 5 extra games for a team playing from the first round if they make it all the way to the championship game. That's not great for player safety, especially since the NFL season would start up right around the next year, and it'd probably end about when it does now, so it'd end about like right before combine time, and just it would mess with a bunch of other stuff. The talent gap in FBS is also a lot larger than it is in FCS, because you have the 4 power conferences, and then you've got the Group of 5 conferences, or what might be more now with the Pac-12 coming back next season. Either way, it might create more cupcakey games in the first round or two. It also would make it a lot harder for a Cinderella run to happen, because a Cinderella team would probably have to win 5 games against better teams instead of just 1 or 2 with a 6-team model or 4-team model. It would be worse for everybody involved, probably. And with teams maybe recognizing the player's safety thing, the regular season would mean less, because if you already say you were a 2-loss team and you're ranked in the teens and you have a good game on your schedule coming up next, you might sit your starters just to rest for the playoffs, since you're already probably guaranteed a spot. It just makes the regular, especially the end of the regular season, which is when rivalry week happens, it just makes games feel less significant in the long run. Of course, college football rivalries take precedence over a lot of other things. It still would feel a lot less intense than it does now, if that makes sense. Of course, the good parts about it is that it's really hard for teams to get left out of a playoff that's so big. There's a chance of seeing more upsets because there's more upset chances, but again, to go on actual Cinderella runs, it'd be a lot more difficult. It's also kind of similar to March Madness in that way, where it's really hard to do it. So if a team were to do it, it would be super impressive. But the talent gap is different, and it different sports and different leagues. It's just not necessarily the best to watch on TV. And I'm not usually a guy that's gonna say that it's bad for ratings, so it shouldn't happen. I'm just saying, if you're like me and want Cinderella runs to actually have a chance of happening, more teams would almost make it more difficult for that to happen. There's also another interesting solution, which is essentially a hybrid of a BCS or other computer algorithms with the human element, or maybe the BCS determines the top 4 seeds, and then the committee determines the rest of the at-large teams, or even the BCS selects the teams, and then the committee determines the seeds. There's a few ways you could do this, where you use robots and computers and along with the committee element, just to try and weed out biases and stuff. The networks most likely would never go for it because it's a lot less dramatic and it's a lot less TV for them, and ratings would go down more than likely. But I'm just a college football fan, so I don't care. In the most blunt of terms, I don't really care about the networks. I care about what's good for the sport, and what's good for the sport is fixing a broken playoff. Regardless of how you feel about any of the solutions that I proposed in this video, I think the one thing everybody that's a college football fan can agree on is that the committee, or at least the playoff structure and how teams are determined, needs to be changed. I'm not 100% sure how the committee decision process is made, as in like who gets on the committee, but I know some acting DAs are on it. There's no reason that should be a thing. And just get some people that know ball on the committee to give us the best college football playoff experience we can get. Because the one biggest problem with having humans make these decisions is everybody's got a bias. And in order to keep biases aside, there's ways to do that. Even another solution that I may have forgot about is implement rules or tiebreaker rules. Like if there's a head-to-head game like Miami and Notre Dame, then Miami has to get in over them if they have the same record, or just something like that. Have more rules involved so that the committee is a little bit more restricted in terms of how they can use their biases to ruin my sport. Yes, that was a little overdramatic, but the point I'm just trying to make is college football playoff is broken. The committee is broken. Something needs to change. I've given some ideas and I've said why it needs to change. I'm hoping it doesn't fall on deaf ears, but there's, of course, a pretty good chance that it's going to. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Remember, leave a like, comment, share, whatever you want to do. And I will see you guys in the next one, where hopefully it is a lot more positive.